Arch is a highly customizable Linux distro that in the past 10 years came a long way from the cool kid Linux distribution to an emergent standard, used by Valve as a foundation for their SteamOS. If you want to install Arch on your laptop or a desktop computer, you basically have two options. You can either install it manually, which is quite a challenge if you're doing it for the first time, or you can use a beginner-friendly ArchInstall script, which is basically a guided installer included in the official Arch ISO. Of course, there is a third option. You can install Arch-based distros like EndeavourOS, Omarchy, or Manjaro Linux. But if you already know how to install the original distro yourself, why would you need opinionated and simplified versions of it? So, let's get started. First, you need to download the Arch Linux ISO. Go to the official webpage archlinux.org and choose the HTTP mirror nearest to your location, or hit the magnet link to download it conveniently via a BitTorrent client. Then create a bootable USB. On macOS and Windows, you can use tools like Ventoy, Rufus or Balena Etcher to write a bootable USB with an image you've just downloaded. And if you're already daily driving another major Linux distro like Ubuntu or Fedora, you can use the default disk image writer and just let things do the things. This will erase all data from the USB stick, so don't forget to double check that you're using the right one. Then, after the process is done, just plug it into your computer and reboot. You'd need to get into your BIOS and choose to boot from the freshly created live USB. Once booted into the live environment, simply type ArchInstall command and press enter. Don't forget to check your internet connection by pinging google.com or archlinux.org. You'll need internet access during installation to download the latest and greatest packages from the official Arch repositories. You can also enter pacman-sy archinstall to update ArchInstall script before running it, just in case if your installation medium was created long time ago. If your PC is connected to the internet via the Ethernet port, you are good to go. However, if you're trying to install Arch on a laptop without it, simply enter the iwctl command to manage your Wi-Fi connection. Then use device list to see all your available Wi-Fi devices, then enter station scan and station get networks to look for existing Wi-Fi networks, and then use station connect to, well, connect your Wi-Fi. And boom, that's it! Don't forget to exit the iwctl and run the ArchInstall script. By the way, if you need these commands in a plain text format to read or to copy and paste, check out ArchWiki. You can also visit my Telegram channel where I post all sorts of Linux related stuff, including memes, news and useful articles. We have a really cozy and lovely community out there and I would be so happy if you could join us. The link in the description down below. And now let's get back to the ArchInstall. The list you see right now on screen is precisely the menu of ArchInstall, and the first entry we have is language. ArchInstall is available in many different languages, but given the fact that you are already watching this video in English, I would 100% recommend you not to switch the language of the installer. Each of those translations has been contributed by the community, so they are not complete, and if something goes wrong, you have higher chances of getting help on Reddit and Arch forums if you are able to articulate issues in English. The next entry is locales, where you can select the country you live in so the system could correctly display date and time formats, different monetary values, and other standards specific to your region. The list of locales inside this entry is not organized very well, so you can skip this step and set it up later with the help of graphical user interface. Obviously, never install locales of languages you don't speak, because they will also affect system messages inside your terminal and display names of applications in Flatpak repos. The third entry allows you to select preferred mirrors to download system components and other packages at a better speed. I suggest you to leave it blank and allow the installer to optimize things for you. Everything will be okay. And in additional repositories, I suggest you to enable Multilib, which contains 32-bit libraries that can be used to run and build 32-bit applications on 64-bit systems, like for example Steam. Now it is time to choose your file system and enable encryption. If you are coming from Windows, you're probably used to NTFS, which was developed in the 90s, while Linux can offer a bit more recent standards. All available file systems on Linux can deal with exabyte scale volumes and multi-terabyte files, and since we're talking about free and open source software, every single one of them is greatly documented and continuously improved by the whole community. If you're relatively new to Linux, I would suggest selecting ext4. It is a mature standard, it is recommended to most people and especially beginners, it is capable of case folding, which is good for launching Windows games on Linux, and it is what Valve chose for the Steam Deck. Other file systems like XFS and BetterFS are also good options, though they require a bit more knowledge and experience, and if you install an Arch for the first time, stick with ext4. The exuberance of options and different standards might sound a bit confusing, but bear with me, there's nothing too difficult to make things unintelligible. ArchInstall is capable of handling partitioning automatically with sensible defaults, but if you want, you can do it manually. In that case, you would need to create at least 4 partitions including boot, root, home, and swap. Boot partition contains stuff needed to boot your system and update the kernel. Root directory is the base of the entire file system. Home is needed to store user data, and I'll explain the purpose of swap partition in the next couple of minutes. Keep in mind that the home directory is purely optional, and if you have a device with a single small drive, you might be good with just 2 or 3 partitions. Here, for example, we have a laptop with 128 gigs of storage. Reserve at least 1 GB as a boot partition and set it to FAT32. Then use the rest of available space as a root directory. Don't forget to set it to ext4. Also, you might want to leave 4 or 8 gigs available for the swap partition. When your computer runs out of memory, swap allows it to use space on your SSD as a virtual extension of physical RAM, to offload some background tasks onto your drive and free up some space for more demanding processes. If you have a laptop with 4 or 8 gigs of RAM, you would find it extremely beneficial to have swap enabled, otherwise Linux will simply kill every process that takes more RAM than the system can offer. Also, swap is required if you want to enable hibernation. Basically, to go and hibernate, your computer needs to save the system state into the swap space before it can completely power itself off. However, if you don't need hibernation and you don't want to waste precious 4 gigs of storage on your laptop, you can set up swap in ZRAM, which will not create any additional virtual RAM space, but instead will compress packages loaded into your memory without using your hard drive. This option is a bit more CPU demanding, and I would recommend it if you have 16, 32 and even more gigs of memory, which may sound like a nice flex in 2026. Okay, if you want your data to be encrypted, you can go back to the previous entry and enable LUKS encryption. Just don't forget your password. The next 2 entries allow you to pick the bootloader and one of the officially supported kernels. If you are not experienced with Linux, you should probably stick to the default options, which are a systemd boot for the bootloader and a standard vanilla Arch for the kernel. It is also time to choose a hostname. Hostname is basically a name for your PC that will appear everywhere, from the terminal window to a list of authorized devices on Steam. So you can use different naming systems for different machines, like home, studio, bedroom, Steam Deck, whatever, or you can use real people names to distinguish computers in your household, like Pavel's PC or Peter's laptop. Feel free to choose whatever name you want. The next entry, authentification, is pretty straightforward. Here you have to set up a root password, which you're gonna need later to execute commands with root privileges using sudo. Here you can also add multiple users for you and your family members. Just be careful who you want to name a super user, meaning who would be allowed to act as an administrator of the system. You can also enable UTF to log in with a USB key, which I'm not using, so I'm gonna skip this entry and move to the next one, because right now we're going to select a system profile and choose desktop environment, GPU drivers, and everything else that matters most. ArchInstall comes with a short list of pre-programmed default profiles configured to provide sane defaults. Since you're installing Linux on your personal computer, I strongly advise you to select the desktop profile. After hitting desktop, you'll be immediately prompted to select desktop environment or window manager, which is a complete graphical user interface that sits on top of the Linux kernel. I suggest to pick KDE or GNOME for the first time, since these are the 2 biggest desktop environments out there. GNOME is commonly used as a default desktop environment on most major Linux distros, including Debian, Fedora, Ubuntu and RHEL, while SteamOS uses KDE Plasma outside of Steam Big Picture mode. They are both decent options, and in most cases you will get away perfectly fine using either GNOME or KDE, unless you are having an NVIDIA GPU, in which case I would strongly advise you to install a desktop environment that still has X11 support, like XFCE, Mate or Cinnamon. You see, X11 is an old display server protocol that is soon going to be replaced by a modern alternative called Wayland on both GNOME and KDE, and NVIDIA's support for Wayland is not just there yet. Be careful, cause you're about to choose graphics driver. If you have AMD or Intel GPU, the choice is pretty obvious, but those of you who own NVIDIA GPU should double check which architecture you have at your disposal, because newer drivers does not support older generations, while open source Nouveau drivers are designed specifically for older GPUs. And Greeter is a login screen program that runs before you log into your desktop session. I chose GNOME, which defaults to GDM, but for example KDE prefers SDDM, so choose your Greeter accordingly to your desktop environment. The next entry, Applications, allows you to enable Bluetooth, select Audio Server and install common Unix printing servers, also known as CUPs. If you are planning to use your PC as a regular desktop, I advise you to hit Yes in each entry and select Pipewire as your audio server. The next step is network configuration. Here you can choose to copy your existing Wi-Fi configuration from the live installation medium, or you can install a network manager, which is a recommended option for beginners. Both GNOME and KDE Plasma are integrated tightly with Network Manager as their primary network management tool on most Linux distributions, including Arch Linux. Now you can choose whether you want to install some additional packages. You can skip this process if you don't know what to install and do it later. But keep in mind that Arch follows a strict keep it simple policy, so the base install provides only a minimal clean system without any unnecessary packages. If you need a specific web browser, music player or even NTFS driver, you have to install them yourself. The problem is that installer handles you a list of all available packages sorted in alphabetical order. You can't type the names, you can't filter them or group by the repository. You have to scroll the entire list to find one specific music player or text editor or Android emulator or whatever you're looking for and select them one by one. It sucks, it shouldn't be this way, so I recommend you to skip this entry entirely and just install them later. The next entry is time zones. This should be pretty straightforward, but again, for some reason we have a vertical list of the alphabetically sorted time zones, where the US sits next to UTC and Poland sits next to Pacific with no time indicators like UTC +1 or +2, +6 and etc. Just leave it be, enable NTP timesync and let's call it a day. Well, we are almost done. Now click install, review the configuration you selected and buckle your seatbelt. In a couple of minutes you'll be using Arch Linux. The installer will download the latest versions of chosen packages and build your operating system. In my case the whole process took almost 5 minutes, and those of you who have a faster internet may witness better results on your machine. What you can do now is either reboot the computer or root into your new system to perform post-installation configuration. You can just type here Firefox, Obsidian, HTOP and whatever else you might need. Don't be afraid of forgetting something, you'd be able to install it later. But that is purely optional. Again, you can install those packages later through your terminal or graphical user interface. For the first time, I would recommend you rewind back a bit and just reboot your system and log into your desktop. And that's it! Enjoy your freshly installed Arch Linux! Don't forget to update your system regularly by typing sudo pacman-syu into the terminal, never forget to back up important data from time to time, and avoid experimental repos or suspicious packages in Arch user repository. This was Reluctant Anarchist and I have nothing left to say.